He kōna e purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
It was still, it was a shock to everyone that I did it, because going through law school and then everyone's like, what? 2 years after you're quitting?
It's been quite an adventure for Nalini Singh, who decided to give up a career in law in the early 2000s to become a romance writer, with what's now a worldwide cult-like following.
It's a good cult. Come and join us.
This is Here Now with me, Kadamri Raghukumar. Fiji-born, Auckland-based Nalini Singh is a best-selling author who writes about these complex paranormal romances set in these deep, shadowy worlds. She tells me she's always been an English nerd growing up in a family of readers, but took up law instead at uni. At least it meant she'd be writing. That career only lasted a couple of years.
It does definitely take a kind of belief in yourself to really strive for the dream, I think. And I'm so grateful to my younger self that I had the strength to do that, even though I was stressed out, because what am I doing? Who quits their job at a really prestigious firm kind of thing to go off and write? Yeah.
She went off to write and hasn't stopped ever since. Her first book, Desert Warrior, released in 2003, and since then her novels have made it to the New York Times and the USA Today bestsellers list. And turns out some of them can be found in about 20 different languages. I mean, what's not to universally love about supernatural love stories set in a world of Armageddon, rife all at once with archangels, telepaths and shadowy beings that change form? She's now dabbling with thrillers, and I wanted to see how that's been going, so Nalini agreed to meet me in a tea shop in Mount Eden today. So the first thing I noticed when I walked in here was your book up there on the almost top shelf.
Yeah, it's all the new releases, and yeah.
It's quite unusual to see an entire section of romance novels.
Yeah.
It's not very common in New Zealand.
No. That's why they're a specialist bookshop, yeah. They do thrillers as well over there, but it's romance and teas mostly, yeah.
Sounds like a good combination.
Yeah, it is. It's really nice because I love tea as well. Yeah.
So what's been your personal experience of, finding some kind of recognition on home turf after all of these years, having become famous overseas before you even became famous here?
Yeah, so it was interesting because when I started, there was no one in New Zealand, no publisher in New Zealand, that was publishing what I was writing. So I had to go international from the start, I had to submit. And this was well before self-publishing really became a thing in any sense of the word. So the only option was to go to publishers in the US, England, Canada, those kind of... Just so from the start, my career was always going to start internationally if I managed to get it going. And then I did get published, but because it was published, by a US publisher, my books weren't showing up in stores here. Or just would be in a specialist bookstore like this that we're sitting in today.
So why was it in the first place that you think there was no publisher here that was at that point publishing romance?
Yeah, even now there's not that much genre publishing in New Zealand, and I think it's because it's a very small market in New Zealand, and the publishers tend to focus on very local books or, sports books, cookbooks. There's just a very small window that they have for, I would say, general fiction, and probably genre books would fall under that. So even now it's not a big part of the market because a lot of the books are coming in internationally anyway. So I just think just because New Zealand's population is so small, and so there's less space for those kind of books. On a personal level, I did always feel like part of the writing community here, but more recently I've started writing New Zealand set thrillers, and those have really made an impact in terms of where I'm seen.
Branching out into murder mysteries definitely has her being noticed in New Zealand much more than previously in her career. Her first rural thriller was a finalist at the Ngaio Marsh Awards of 2020. She puts that recognition on home turf down to the significance the sense of place has in these books.
I love New Zealand settings. Actually, my first thriller was inspired by just the breathtaking New Zealand settings, and thinking about how Nordic noir is quite a big thing, and that's the mysteries that are coming out of Scandinavia and those sort of countries. And there's a lot of similarities between them and New Zealand. It's small populations, it's quite isolated areas, breathtaking landscapes.
Yep, the landscapes are very similar.
Very similar. And so I thought, well, if you can have murder mysteries set in Iceland, which has very little crime, why not New Zealand? So, I just played with that idea, and then I was traveling around and I saw this girl, she was a hiker, get off the bus at like a entry into a trail, and she was all by herself, and she just walked in, and it was like a vanishing point into the distance, and I just thought, no one might know that she's out here, what might happen to her. And it just kind of started things in my brain, and I just ran with it. And and the next thing I know, I'm writing a thriller set on the West Coast and the South Island. I've always liked doing different things, and even though I write romance, a lot of my romance has a mystery element to it. It just so happens that the murderer is a vampire instead of, like a human person. So the mystery, like the building blocks of mystery, is something I'm familiar with, both as a reader and in terms of writing in my books. And so the biggest change actually has been to go all in on the mystery. Instead of having that romantic arc, we're fully into the dark side. And being able to write in New Zealand has been really, really interesting. It also helps define the difference between my romances and these books, because these are very much set here. It couldn't be any other place on earth. And so it's actually really fun, and for my brain, it's a good reset.
She's now had about 24 books published, and it's not uncommon for her books to be pre-ordered around the world these days, mostly by women, she tells me, but also a sprinkling of men. Nalini's got her fans hooked before her next book even comes out. So that begs the eternal question. How long does it take you to write a book?
It's kind of like saying how long's a piece of string.
As you're so prolific, I think it becomes an even more relevant question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever people sort of push me on it, I'll say, 3 or 4 months. But that doesn't take into account that most of my books are series. And so what it means is I might write a book now, but I've been putting things in place for that for the past 3 years or 4 years. So by the time I actually come to write it, I've actually done a massive amount of background work to write this current book. Because that's the beauty of series that are quite tightly interlocked, like mine are. All these Easter eggs come to fruition, and that means I'm doing a lot of research beforehand. So with my thrillers, they're standalone. So I don't have that series work in the background. So when I start with a thriller, I tend to start when I'm traveling around New Zealand, because I do that quite a bit, and I'll see a place and I know when it's a good spot, and the ideas for stories start bubbling.
Describe a place like that for me.
Okay, so
what was the last place that you felt really inspired by?
So I just had a thriller come out recently, and it's called There Should Have Been 8, and it's set in the shadow of the Southern Alps, deep into the golden grasses and sort of central Otago type landscapes. And we were driving around, and we saw the sign for coffee.
And we being?
Me and my partner.
Uh-huh.
And we saw the sign for coffee, and we're like, should we go? It was really early in the morning, and we're like, why not? Why is there a random sign for coffee in a quite isolated drive? It's beautiful, but you don't see many. There's no shops, let's put it this way. So we turn in, and we're driving and driving and driving. And we're like, I'm thinking this is how people get murdered in the movies. They're like, all these grasses are waving, the mountains and the Southern Alps in the background. It was amazing, breathtaking. And we finally get there, and it was a ski chalet that was closed for, like the summer type season. That really inspired me. And I thought, what if instead of a chalet, it's a house, a ruined mansion at the end of this long drive. And I didn't use the exact location because there's a river that plays into it, so there's a river, and that just sparked my imagination. I thought, right, I need people trapped in this mansion in the shadow of the Alps, and it's dark, and then there's a polar blast and the snow comes in. So they're really trapped now because, and of course the bridge is collapsing over the river. And
You get the drift, the sort of thing that has the makings of an endless series of the weird, wonderful and paranormal. But whether you're into romance or thrillers or not, it's hard not to notice and judge them by the covers, something that Nalini feels quite strongly about. There are those paranormal romance covers with the classic images of archangels and chiseled faces of mysterious-looking men with blue eyes, and then there are those that are just stark and minimum.
I like talking about book covers and graphics and things like that because there's been a lot of change in the industry over the years, and it's interesting to see what sticks and what doesn't, and what is beloved year after year after year, and what switches, So right now I think there's been this trend of having two covers. One is like the more sort of more graphic in terms of text and not really any visual imagery, and then a second one that's more like a traditional cover with a visual, and so readers can choose what they like, because some people are really into the other one aesthetic or the other. So that's really interesting, and I think that's also come out of like things like TikTok and Instagram, because people like to do aesthetic posts, but you know what, as long as they're doing posts about books, I love it, whichever type of covers they like.
As long as people are reading,
yes,
right?
Yes, exactly. That's what I care about.
As far as reading going out of fashion goes, because of social media mostly, the stats are a little reassuring, at least with romance novels. Worldwide, they take up about 36% of the mass market share of books sold. So Nalini's got plenty to keep her busy.
What gives me hope is things like, if you look at Book Talk, which is the area of TikTok devoted to books, it's massive. It is huge, huge, huge. So, for example, Colleen Hoover's books blew up on Book Talk, and now there is a big budget movie coming out, and there's lots of other books that have blown up. So books are still important to people. They're still reading, and a lot of visual media is actually based on books, which is also something that gives me hope for, books continuing to be important. I think reading will be around always. There's just a kind of stillness and depth in reading that I think you can't really replicate.
That's Here Now this week. You can find more stories like this on all your favourite podcast platforms. That's Apple, iHeartRadio, Spotify. And you can also find us on the RNZ website, where sometimes you'll see videos with these stories. Today's episode was mixed by Jeremy Ansell, and my name is Kadambri Raghukumar.